Welcome to the podcast that puts a finger on the pulse of medicine and technology. On this show, you'll hear from investors, industry executives, and healthcare providers on the science and business of medicine. I'm your host, Omar Khateeb, and this is the State of MedTech.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Omar Khateeb, your host and head of state for the State of MedTech. I'm joined by a very special person, somebody who I've followed on LinkedIn for many years now because she has just such a fantastic talent when it comes to storytelling of what's going on in the healthcare world. And me personally, I'm honored. I have to say I'm honored because I just found out this is her first podcast, ladies and gentlemen. She's done radio. This is the first podcast. So very honored. Beth Kutscher, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today? Where are you calling in from, by the way?
I'm doing great. I'm calling in from San Francisco. I'm in our beautiful office here in Soma, and it's great to be on your show and doing my first podcast.
I know, seriously, I'm astounded, but I guess it's the first time for everything, so welcome to the show. And,
yeah.
For a little background for our audience, you and I first connected, I think 3 or 4 years, I think it's been 4 years ago now. When I started at Potrero and predictive health was starting to take off, you were very much at the forefront of leading and growing LinkedIn's thriving healthcare community. For what it is today, you really laid the foundation for that back then. And I remember you came by the Theranova offices, the incubator we were at, you did a tour with us and everything. And, since then, I've really appreciated everything that you do on LinkedIn, especially in terms of keeping people up to date for all the great things that are happening in the industry, especially given that we just went through a pandemic. But before we get into all this, tell us your story, your origin story. Where are you from? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, and you're right. I was actually LinkedIn's first healthcare editor. When they posted the job, I think I applied just because it didn't make any sense to me. I mean, this was back in 2015 before LinkedIn really had a content strategy. And they were looking for someone to create one for key audiences. And when I arrived, I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I realized it was not because they were bad at hiring, but because it was really going to be up to me to tell them as the healthcare expert what would resonate. And so I did a lot of trial and error.
Where were you coming from, by the way?
I was at Modern Healthcare Magazine. It's a smaller trade publication, but pretty well respected in the field.
Very well respected.
I was in Nashville when I did that. Before that, I was in New York City, where I was born and raised, lived in every borough. Fun fact, not on my LinkedIn profile.
So what borough do you claim though? When someone's like, "Oh, where in New York are you from?" What do you claim?
I guess I'd have to claim Staten Island because that's where I lived the longest. And the funny thing is, everyone always says, even Staten Island, that's always their reaction. But that's where I lived the longest.
Got it. Fantastic. So you came over as the first person for healthcare in LinkedIn, which is huge, and especially 5 years ago. I mean, LinkedIn is a great community today for information and content, but 5-6 years ago, it was still in this weird teenage phase of hey, we're no longer just a resume platform. We actually have content and stuff. So what was that like?
Yeah, so I had to learn pretty quickly what people wanted from LinkedIn. And I would go into these meetings and I would tell people to post more, or I'd say, doctors, and especially doctors who had their own social media platforms, their own professional associations, they give me this look okay, I don't really get it. But I really zeroed in on the strategy, what I called the skills you don't learn in medical school. And when I started giving them the pitch, which is, maybe you want to consult for pharma. How do you do that? How do you prevent joining the next Theranos? And then I could see the wheels turning. The article that you talked about where I was at Potrero, that was part of my health invention series, which ran until December 2019. And it was about clinician entrepreneurs and really resonated. It was one of the most popular topics that I've covered here because I think people want to learn the skills, those business skills, those productivity skills, the tech skills, and LinkedIn was a place where they could learn it.
Absolutely. And, since the time I know you've always been a very humble, down to earth person. So I'll do the hyping up for you. But those article series really did a lot for the LinkedIn community, especially for physicians, because for me, I've been bullish on LinkedIn since 2014, 2015. And I'll never forget that a lot of large industry players laughed at the idea when I said, hey, you should spend more time making content and engage on LinkedIn. And they're like, physicians don't use LinkedIn. That's the dumbest. I'm like, no, you'll see. But your article series not only brought more engagement and got a lot more physicians active on LinkedIn, but it made things exciting. I mean, this is a great industry to be in, but we often get overlooked because you see like tech and fintech and everything. And so this is a great industry mainly because one, there's exciting stuff going on, but of course what we do is it's a very noble calling. We're doing things that have to do with health. And so that article series was really, really quite fantastic. And so the team has definitely grown and everything. So like how have things evolved since then?
So I was one of the first 20 editors here, I think, when I joined, and now we have more than 80 around the world.
Wow.
Actually, yeah. So the US is still our largest office by sheer number, but in terms of where we have the most coverage, it's international actually, and where we're growing the fastest, which is super exciting. I was actually pretty jet lagged the first time I met you. I just come back from meeting with the World Health Organization. I was out in Geneva on their global health campus, meeting with some other NGOs. It was really exciting to kind of create an actual global healthcare community. And that's what I always said about LinkedIn. It's really a 360 where it's not just doctors talking to other doctors, but doctors talking to nurses, pharma executives, and really creating that 360.
That's exactly right. And I always appreciate that. I mean, the other place that healthcare, Facebook, it's very much like limited to groups. Instagram, it's, the discoverability is very difficult. Twitter is great, but again, sometimes it gets sawed off. LinkedIn has just done such a fantastic job in terms of bringing all these communities together. And what I love is I started aside from this podcast, a newsletter called the State of MedTech, and so when I publish these articles, what I love is seeing physicians, industry execs, med students, everybody kind of like chiming in and having these discussions. And LinkedIn just has the right platform to have these like deeper, more thoughtful discussions, which I've always appreciated. Now, I got to ask you a question on the global growth, because, me and other LinkedIn content creators, we did notice like in our numbers that like for some reason, international keeps like growing, in terms of engagement and everything. Like, what are the top 2 or 3 countries that are growing when it comes to engagement and everything, specifically to LinkedIn healthcare, if you can share?
Well, one of our most engaged audiences, I don't have exact numbers for you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my head.
Yeah, totally.
One of our most engaged healthcare audiences is actually in the UK. People love to talk about the NHS. I've done some reporting there. I've been out there a few times to meet with people there, develop the audience. We've done surveys about some of the discontent that people feel working at the NHS. I was told I need to be very careful, though, as an American coming in and trying to tell people. It's kind of like the New York City subway. Everybody hates it or loves to gripe about it, but don't let anybody else tell you it's not the best in the world. So that's been kind of fun to learn. I think France is doing some really interesting things in healthcare. We do everything in local language. So I don't know if we have any French speakers that are listening to this podcast, but they've got some really meaningful people that they've managed to get into their flow.
Yeah, France, was kind of came out of nowhere because, just in the last couple of years, there's a lot of really exciting medtech companies have come out of there. One, a robotic company called Moon Surgical is doing some great things. So that's very interesting to hear. So UK and France, what about on the Western Hemisphere, outside of the US and North America, I guess?
Yeah. So, I guess it's important for you to point out that even though we have 80 people around the world, I'm the only healthcare specialist on the team. So it's really getting someone who has a passion project for this. We do have editors in Australia. I've tried to cover that. We have Japan, India. India is another huge English speaking country for us. Brazil is another one. But it really, these are small teams, 2 to 4 people sometimes. They're doing a microcosm of everything we do in the States. So I think I'm still the center of it, but certainly, we welcome people from all over the world, all languages, create a healthcare community on LinkedIn. I hope we talk more about that in a bit, but, people should start their own. I think we try to definitely be more self-service. I'm just here as a guide, not the only person telling you how you should LinkedIn.
No, totally. Well, let's get into the community aspect of it, if you'd like. I know that you started a new LinkedIn group called Path to Recovery. I'll leave links to all this and your handle below in the show notes. But tell us more about like these groups. Like, why is it important for the LinkedIn users to get more involved with them?
Right. So I think kind of taking a step back, I took a small pause from healthcare during the worst possible year, 2020, because I moved into a management role. And so, after realizing we can't go a whole year during a pandemic without a healthcare editor, I was asked to kind of wear both hats. And so At that point, I needed to reevaluate the healthcare strategy and realize there was basically one story in healthcare these days, and it was COVID. And so I started a newsletter called Path to Recovery. We'd already kind of missed the initial wave, right? Not the COVID wave, but sort of that acute crisis. And now it's kind of like, where do we go from here? We're kind of settling into this new normal. We know what's coming. What's coming can still overwhelm us. And so this is I have a newsletter, and it's a place to discuss some of these issues. And really what I do is I don't do a ton of original reporting anymore, but I highlight conversations that are happening around LinkedIn from some of the most influential voices that post regularly. I realized the reason I started this group, and I actually started it just this week, so very timely, is I realized that a lot of these conversations that were happening were bringing in people outside of healthcare. And I had this feeling that maybe people who are so immersed in it don't necessarily want the peanut gallery to weigh in. And a perfect example would be vaccines. And I think, every time I post about something like hospital vaccine mandates, a very important topic, they get flooded with comments from people who have never worked in healthcare, don't necessarily, and their opinions might be valuable.
But they're not healthcare professionals.
But they're not healthcare professionals, and they shouldn't dominate the conversation. And so I figured there's a space for both. It's not one or the other. You can find both on LinkedIn. I think as an editor, my philosophy is that a lot of what I should do should be public, because it's about creating that open space. The more readers in general, it's easier to find. But sometimes you just kind of want to go off to the side and talk with those people and create that sort of dynamic community we're talking about. It is 360, but sometimes it needs to just be just healthcare.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I think one of the advantages LinkedIn has, like, for better or for worse, is that, a lot of these things that end up having like really difficult virality to deal with, Twitter is kind of a great example of that. LinkedIn seems, because of the more professional community it has a little bit more time to sort of gauge and figure out, like, okay, we're seeing these issues in these other platforms, so then how do we set up our own, procedures and operations to sort of take care, to manage these things. So you do want to have open public discussion, but at the same time, like, you don't want the handful of healthcare professionals who actually can speak intelligently on this topic to get buried under, lots of comments from just random people, Well,
yeah, that's part of it. I think part of it is creating a safe space, for lack of a better term, is I don't want to get to the point where people are afraid to voice their opinions on things, or just want to talk about something that maybe they don't want to air with their wider network. One of the most popular topics I covered before COVID was, and by popular, I mean it got the most engagement, was about nurse bullying. And somebody wrote a piece about just the terrible atmosphere for nurses. And it came from this sort of top-down hierarchical hazing culture there. It was great. And she wrote it openly. It was great, I think. But I could also see somebody saying, I want to talk to other nurses about it, just kind of in a closed group, rather than, a larger forum where, I might get tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of views.
Right. That makes sense. Well, let me ask you, so as LinkedIn's healthcare leader, what's your advice? Because, like, one thing that me personally, again, it's like a self-fulfilling thing. I am encouraging and help a lot of physicians spend more time on LinkedIn to get the most out of it. Not only getting information, but obviously engaging, right? And I think LinkedIn just gets so much better that way. But, like, what's your advice to physicians who are just getting on LinkedIn and trying to get started? What do you mainly want to see out of physicians? Is it that you're hoping to see them more, like, again, ideal scenario, more video content, articles, more posting, more polls? Like, what mix of media is LinkedIn and you mainly looking for?
So there's a lot to unpack there, because I think you asked some interrelated but different questions.
I definitely did. I told you, this is an unscripted show. You see, this is the beauty about it.
I'll say, so if you go to my profile, you can follow me, first of all, and subscribe to my newsletter. But I also wrote a piece called How to Build a Healthcare Community on LinkedIn. And one of the things I mention in it is a coworker, doesn't cover healthcare, but she describes LinkedIn as a platform for generosity. And I think if you think about it in that way, then you kind of get a sense of what we're looking for. So, you know, I guess the debate over closed group, public forum, where people come to LinkedIn to share their professional expertise. It's not about wasting time. Oh, I've got a few minutes between meeting, check my other social media sites. This is where you go to invest in yourself and to help each other. And so I think I always say that our sweet spot is where the industry trend intersects with the career issue. So you might hear,
I like that.
Yeah. So you might hear about hospital mergers, right? And hospital consolidations, how they're rolling up physician practices with huge trends, especially several years ago. So you have your solo, 3-person practice, like my dad did when he was still practicing. When do you decide whether to actually sell? Maybe you want to go it alone. Maybe you've joined a hospital, but you're thinking, maybe I want to go back to private practice. How do you weigh those decisions? And I think it's also a little bit about vulnerability and kind of putting yourself out there. Every once in a while, I write about how I interact with the healthcare system. I think if you approach it from that perspective, then you kind of get what we're looking for. The other piece of it, you mentioned what kind of content types. I would say I'm content type agnostic, whatever you feel most comfortable with. I will always feel most comfortable with writing because I'm better. I always say I'm better in writing than any other form. Probably that's why this is my first podcast. But if that's it, but if you're a video person, especially if you're a younger, early career doctor, nurse, and you just prefer to be in front of a camera, go for it. Whatever you're good at will get the most engagement. And also every person is an expert in their domain, whether they realize it or not. Even if you're still in college and trying to find your career path, you're still witnessing history in a sense by being a student during COVID. And so we
Absolutely.
are, and medical education is another great example of a field that really has had to be reshaped because of COVID. I want to hear all those experiences. Something by virtue of just living your life and being a professional or a soon-to-be professional.
So I'm glad that you answered that. So let me tell you the reason why I asked that. Because of course, I spoke, throughout the week, I'm interviewing different physicians, talking to different people. And some of the physicians I talked to, I said, I'm interviewing Beth from LinkedIn. And they're like, ask her what content type is going to help me blow up on the algorithm. I'm like, guys, that's not how it works. Just ask her. I'm like, okay, I'll ask her. Cause I knew that you were going to say exactly this, more or less, which is you got to pick something that you like, that you're good at. And the thing, again, what I like about LinkedIn, unlike an Instagram, unlike a Twitter or anything else, on one side, it's easy to grow on LinkedIn. You connect with people, you can grow that way. That being said, there's no such thing as an overnight success on LinkedIn. You can't do a crazy dance video and then all of a sudden you have all these people following you. You actually have to have a practice of constantly showing up, providing value, providing something interesting and insightful and even entertaining. And that's what ends up working. And so the physicians like Dr. Qasim Butt, he's the kidney health expert. He always posts these videos on LinkedIn. He's had massive success. And what's the best part, and he credits it, and so do I, that LinkedIn helped him. You said that LinkedIn is the intersection of industry trends and career decisions, correct? So yes. For him, he was a practicing nephrologist, was, ready to change it up. He didn't want to do clinical practice anymore. And so he and I got connected through LinkedIn. I encouraged him to do more content on LinkedIn. And fast forward a year later, he's now exited clinical practice and he's spending more time as a chief medical officer in industry, working between industry and clinics, And so I feel that's kind of the power of LinkedIn is that, there's no tricks to this. It's just it's just showing up and spending time with the platform and providing that content and having those meaningful discussions. I mean, that's the right way to think about it, right?
Well, yes. I mean, I think it's a platform where you get what you put into it. You get out of it what you put into it. And so it's not, the other thing I think that's important is it's not just posting and posting and posting necessarily, whatever content type you choose. You got to go to other people's pages and engage with them.
Exactly.
If someone comments on your post, respond. I think that's where sometimes people get tripped up, is they're so focused on churning out content instead of thinking about how can I actually engage with others, and then they'll do the same to you probably, or for you. So that's one thing I always encourage. Not to say that we don't sometimes have posts that go viral or articles that go viral.
It happens, yeah.
It happens,
but that's the whole point of a social media platform. It's not a media platform. It's a social media platform, which means there's media that you can engage with. And I know I completely agree. And actually, I mean, one interesting trend that I saw this past year, mainly in the demand gen and growth marketing arena, is that a lot of the people's comments, because, you know, the character limits have been extended, I guess, the comments are actually sometimes even better than the posts. Like some people get really deep, interesting comments on like certain certain topics. And a lot of times I look at posts just to go through the comments because there's a lot of good stuff in there. You know, so I think that there's all these really interesting dynamics that happen on LinkedIn. Now, let me shift a little bit because again, you shifted away from just I guess you're like traditional journalism. Now you're essentially curating a lot of content and voices, right? So in the past year, like, you know, two of the articles that when I went through your LinkedIn and read up and got caught up on some things, two of your best performing articles, at least in terms of engagement, everything. One was you wrote it in September, this past September. COVID changed everything. How does shell shock profession get back on its feet? And then the other one is today, almost every business is in the healthcare business. So I'm wondering, like, after this year, you're like at the epicenter of healthcare on LinkedIn. What patterns and trends have you noticed? Like, what kind of interesting things have stood out to you, and what have you learned?
Yeah. So
again, many questions in one.
The first piece you mentioned was actually the kickoff of my newsletter. And it was really exciting to see the engagement on that because I think it showed that there is a space for this. The second one, actually, we pulled some LinkedIn data for our annual top startups list. We also do top companies, and we look at where the world wants to work by crunching various data points. And so, you know, healthcare, not surprisingly, was factored more so than pre-pandemic into that coverage. So thanks for pointing those out. I would say one, on LinkedIn, this idea of medical futurism and medtech resonates really strongly. And I think it's because when you think of worlds coming together, you've got engineers, you've got healthcare folks. You also have a lot of lay people that are just really interested in this space, whether, you know, they're coming at it from a patient perspective or they just think it's cool. And it's also a place where there's a lot to debate. It's very meaty. You've got these different cultures that are coming together. You've got engineers that are trying to start a company in stealth mode, and, you know, everything's proprietary. And then you've got doctors that want everything to be peer reviewed and they want to see everything. And so I think that culture class is just fascinating, always does well on LinkedIn. Debates over artificial intelligence in particular does really well.
Yeah, they do.
The other thing I would say is staffing issues. And I know this is a MedTech podcast, and where I think the intersection is when people talk about MedTech, healthcare people I'm referring to, you know, some of the consumer stuff gets a lot of excitement, but what doctors and nurses seem to care about a lot is technology that improves their workflow, and administrators really want something that's going to solve staffing issues. And so I think that's the intersection for this audience. And I think those are probably I mean, you can hang your hat on either of those topics as your first debut to LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, you know, what's really interesting that I've seen, at least in like my anecdotal data gathering over the past year and everything, is that, you know, as physicians are getting more and more engaged on LinkedIn, right, and producing more content, they're seeing this as an opportunity to engage directly with industry because, you know, surprisingly enough, and I can say this, they don't teach you any of these things in medical school. They definitely don't teach you this stuff in residency. So, you know, there's a lot of people I know, like one of my medical school classmates is a spine surgeon now. You know, until he started using LinkedIn, like he had no idea, like, hey, if I want to advise a company or get involved in startups, like, how the hell do I do that? You know, and a lot of these things that are taken for granted, a lot of physicians actually don't know. So LinkedIn has become like a really good, you know, jumping off point for people just to kind of learn and connect and engage and everything. You know, during the I know it's 2021, but like, if you can think back during 2020, like, of course, like this was such a provocative and edgy topic because, you know, we're getting information in real time. So nobody, you know, we're kind of in the fog of war. What were some of the more difficult things that you had to sort of manage during 2020 as, you know, as the leader of healthcare in LinkedIn?
Good question. I did mention that I wasn't covering healthcare in 2020, and I think that was
But at some point you came back. But weren't you wearing two hats at the same time back then, or not at all?
Not till 2021.
Oh, not
I
till
think
2021. Okay. Got it.
I will
So
say, I
that
mean,
was
I
like
think
2020 is your sabbatical in management is what I'm hearing.
sort of, yeah. Focusing on my own team's mental wellness. I think, you know, I I created a healthcare community before I left that had a ton of organic traction. And I think people just continue to share their stories, to lean on each other, and to pick up the mantle to a certain extent. And I think that shows the power of the LinkedIn community, that I'm really only one person and I'm overseeing content for literally millions of healthcare professionals that we have on LinkedIn. I consider myself a convener to some extent, but but the audience is and the content creators are really at the heart of all this.
Yeah, and so like what does your normal week look like in terms of like going through this content curating? Because again, when you put these great articles together, they're very well researched, and you're of course pulling together a lot of really great information. But that's a lot of content. So how do you go about doing that?
Well, it's sort of like being a traditional reporter, except instead of calling somebody up and asking for a quote, I ask them to share on LinkedIn. And so I'm always reaching out to people that are interesting and asking them. I have a series called Hard Cases where doctors and nurses share the toughest challenges of their careers and how they resolved it. I look for
And that's
contributors.
like within comments, like you do a post and then you're looking for people to comment or direct message you. What does that process look
I'm
like?
looking for people to write. So anybody who wants to write about, share their story. And we've had people from, medical school deans to like that nurse, actually, when she wrote about bullying, it was part of the Hard Cases series. We've had people write about being worried about performing an intimate exam on someone that was much older and then they missed a colon cancer diagnosis, things like that. Really, some really poignant and hard hitting. Some more about, how to incorporate an EHR system. I think the head of Kaiser's Medical Group wrote about that. That was one of the early pieces when I first launched that series. So it's really run the gamut. And I forgot what we were talking about.
No, don't
Or I
worry.
lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. Look, it happens. It happens. And plus, I'm throwing a lot of like fun questions at you. So
Your
like
questions are very multifaceted.
they are, Yeah, I know they are. That's something that I got to work on. I got to pick like one thing at a time. So okay,
One theme at a time,
okay,
right?
here we go. Here's the one thing. And by the way, I'm not cutting this out. I gotta
Fair enough, okay.
I'm not perfect. People got to hear this. So look, so picking one thing, okay? So you mentioned the importance. So you started, you're going into 2022, and when we're releasing this episode, it will be at the very beginning of 2022. What are some of the initiatives that you're hoping to get launched that that are really top of mind for you? I know you started Path to Recovery Group, but like, what are some big initiatives that you want to happen from the healthcare community? I mean, like physicians, industry professionals, investors from the LinkedIn community, they're all listening to this. So like, what do you want to see from us?
Well, the first thing I want is during the week of the JP Morgan conference, come and post your predictions. I'm going to be doing a big prediction roundup next
Oh,
month.
I'm so happy you just mentioned that because I just started work, like literally this morning, I started working on it. I did a live stream just because of that. Okay, that's very helpful to know. So predictions for JP Morgan. Okay, got it. Yes.
I want to know what other people want to see. One thing I want to build is I get a lot of readers on each of my Path to Recovery newsletters. I think maybe even more than that first one you mentioned, but I'd really love to see more comments. You asked me how I get my sources, and sometimes I get pitched just like a traditional journalist. And so, feel free to email me or, shoot me an email. And, I cover, and we also have our news module. I guess that's another piece of this. So on the right-hand side of the homepage, under today's news and views, you have all of our trending coverage. None of that is algorithm. All of it is curated by our human editors. And if you see our news strategy is we write a short blurb, but the rest of it is all comments. So when I'm calling sources and asking them to engage, it's usually, post about something in the news. People always want to know what should I post about, and I always say timing is everything. So I can't really predict what's going to be ahead in 2022, but follow the news cycle, and you'll know what you should post, what I want to hear from you. From me, you'll continue to see more data-driven coverage. I'm hearing anecdotally about nurses leaving the bedside, and so I want to see, how our numbers hold up. For example, the Atlantic just reported that almost 20% of doctors and nurses have left the field. So I think that's the kind of thing that will eventually show up in LinkedIn data. We'll be able to do more. I've got an exciting live show coming up in January. Dean at Tulane is going to be talking about health equity. So that's going to be fun.
What's your live show going to be on? And what's it called?
So it's going to be about health equity. I'm just going to call it Path to Recovery.
Got it. And then Path to Recovery, that's a newsletter that people can subscribe to. It's a group. What is it?
It's all of the above.
All the above. Okay, got it.
It's all the above. Yeah, it's a franchise.
Got it. Fantastic. Yeah, and JP Morgan this year is going to be very interesting just because 2020 was kind of like, I think they can't. Yeah, no. It happened in 2020. During 2021, it was like an afterthought. Like after it happened, I was like, oh yeah, JP Morgan happened. I completely forgot. But I think 2022, it's going to be kind of like back to normal. So it's going to be very interesting. What are some of your predictions for JP Morgan?
Well, I think digital health will continue to be hot. It's been hot for years, but I think there'll continue to be investment in it. I think it's going to completely upend medicine. I think, or healthcare in general. That includes nursing, pharmacy. The staffing shortage is going to have to be addressed. I think workers, we're seeing this in other industries, workers have a lot more power. I think that's going to happen in the healthcare profession as well. I work in tech and my husband is a physician, and I mean, it's worlds apart in terms of how I was treated during the pandemic.
Is he active on LinkedIn?
He's relatively active. Yeah, he's relatively active.
Are you at the dinner table and you're like, hey, you haven't posted in like a week or two. What's up with that? Like, or you usually keep church and state message? Yeah,
that's all I asked for. But
Dora, I do the same thing with my wife. She likes all my articles too. She's usually the first one.
He's a top supporter of mine, and he posts too. And so he's, I won't embarrass him by calling him out, but it's just, I mean, think about like which industries are investing in their employees. It's definitely not healthcare. And, when I post about burnout, inevitably nurses will write in and say, yeah, what resources, you almost hear them sort of, giving me that, that dry, sarcastic laugh in the comments.
You know what the tagline for healthcare is, or like, working in a hospital, it's like, do more with less. That's pretty much the mantra, So, sort of jumping back. So JP Morgan predictions was one thing. What are some other things that you're hoping to see from the healthcare community in 2022? Because again, like the community is very strong, especially in the medtech community, which when I say medtech, I include both industry and physicians for that. So they're always curious, like, how can we make LinkedIn better? What does LinkedIn want to see from us? Because I mean, part of it is that they do want to make it better, but the other side of it is that everybody's trying to do something that's going to, allow them to reach more people and gain more, gain more of an ability to be a thought leader on LinkedIn. So what other requests do you have, from the community in 2022?
Well, I want to know what's happening on the ground where they are. I want to hear personal stories. I want to hear about their workplace issues. We're hearing about the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle. It's happening in healthcare, and it's going to continue to happen.
Very much. Yeah, the Great Resignation is very interesting because, I spoke to multiple medtech recruiters. Well, I guess I contributed to that because like I resigned a few weeks ago and now I'm kind of doing my own thing at the moment. But this is like the best job market that's ever existed, and so there's something very interesting going on for that. So I don't, so I don't know. So sorry, I kind of interrupted you. Keep going.
No, and it's funny because we did a survey, this was even pre-pandemic, where 40% of doctors and pharmacists who were less than 5 years out of school said they were interested in joining a tech company. I don't know how many would actually act on that, but it's a huge shift, and especially now. And
why do you think that is, by the way? Like,
I think it's a cultural thing. I mean, it's so evident to me that you see this in finance too. Investment banking, for example, all new MBA graduates, they want to come to tech because we've got a great work culture here. Things like employees actually are valued. Everyone jokes about the free food and the beautiful offices and the game rooms, but it's so much more than that. It's that, companies really treat you like you are their most valued resource. In healthcare, you actually are the most valuable resource, and yet you're
treated like a commodity.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah. And so, if you think of yourself as a third year college student, a sophomore, even a freshman, and you're thinking, what industry do I want to join? You could join anything, right? If you have high SAT scores, you're an Ivy League school, where do I want to go? Well, the people who seem to be having the most fun are in tech. And I think that, healthcare should be taking note of that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, something that me personally, I've tried to influence over the last few years, like when I speak at conferences and everything and help companies, is that at least on, the industry that serves, whatever industry you look at, the customers they serve, they usually by de fact become kind of like their customers. So the medtech industry, because they serve healthcare and medicine, they're also kind of conservative, right? And so it's taken some time for them to have also the right culture. So like the same way a hospital like will control a physician, it's like, oh, you're going to act, talk, walk exactly how we're going to tell you. Otherwise, we're going to fire you. It's the same thing in the industry. That's started to change more and more because, a lot of larger medtech companies have realized like, yeah, not only is it not a good idea for us to prevent, let's say, our employees from posting more on LinkedIn, it's actually very helpful to us to reach physicians, gain traction, all these different things. And so a lot of them are having to battle with that. And I think it's the same thing in the healthcare system, which they're realizing like, we're going to have to be a little bit more lenient on our providers to do other things outside of their job. Otherwise, they're just going to all quit. And I think we're starting to see that because people just get fed up.
Well, the other thing that's worth pointing out is that the legacy medtech players are no longer the only ones. And every major consumer tech company, from Amazon, Microsoft, the parent company of LinkedIn, of course, even Facebook, is getting into the healthcare space. And they are hiring physicians and nurses and clinical staff. Amazon thinking of reshaping the pharmacy space, pharmacy having huge staffing shortages now. The work environment in retail pharmacy, from what I've been hearing, is terrible these days. And so if you are watching the space, even if you're on the tech side, right, the med tech side, you've got some big competitors that you need to deal with. And some of that is, obviously product and strategy, and some of it is workforce.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, I'll tell you, again, I'll save my predictions so I can write them. And for people who are looking to do JPM predictions, is there a hashtag they should use? How do they best do that to get on your radar?
You can either use the JPM hashtag, or I've been using healthcare in 2022. Just short.
Healthcare in
simple.
2022. Got it. Healthcare in 2022, and then the JP. What's the JP hashtag? Is it just JP? I think it's JPM 2022 or something.
Probably or 22. People use both. People always use both.
Got it. Yeah. So where was I? See, you lost your train of thought earlier. I lost mine.
You don't have notes?
You have to no, I don't do this. No, I do it live. Well, this is not exactly live, but like, yeah, no notes at all. No. So, what I was going to say is that for JP Morgan, one of the things that I feel is going to be happening, like at least in the healthcare industry, just based on what we've seen recently, is that there is a time. So, okay, here's a bit of a prediction. Okay. A couple years ago, the sexy thing was software. It's still sexy, but it's kind of like, yeah, no more hardware. Hardware's kind of made a comeback. And the way it's made a comeback is that there are certain companies like this one called DermaSensor. It's a dermatology-based product, right? And I'm trying to think. I'll think of another one in a moment soon. But essentially, these hardware companies that take the expertise of a specialist and put it in the hands of a primary care doctor. So with DermaSensor, for example, every primary care doctor can use this device and check any skin lesion or any dermatological pathology and be able to diagnose the same way a dermatologist would. And of course, that's going to catch a lot of these cancers a little bit earlier. And so hardware is starting to enable these primary care physicians to become more like specialists. I think that's going to be one major trend. The other one,
rub though on that one.
Oh, okay. Let's hear it. Yes.
So back to AI.
Yeah, go ahead. See,
and why it's unpopular.
Yeah, please. Yes. Let's see. And by the way, I want to be mindful of your time. Do you have a hard stop in 10 or are you good?
I'm good, but
don't worry, this won't be a 3 hour. This won't be a 3 hour long podcast. But no, keep going. Keep going, please.
So one of the challenges for hardware makers is that practices already have a lot of hardware. And so when you ask physicians about, especially radiologists, about AI, they say, well, how's it going to work? The field is dominated by the major players like Philips already and GE. I don't want any more of that, and if there's software, it needs to layer so that the giants are continuing to control it. So I think that's a caveat. It's a good prediction.
Here's my rebuttal, my answer, my yes, but yes.
Okay.
But
yeah, do it.
Primary care physicians are literally making they're not making very good money. They never have, and this is the one way where they're like, oh, this is something that I can actually improve on. The one area, again, this is a stretch, psychiatry. If we look at psychiatry, and again, this is completely different.
Yes.
Psychiatrists
totally.
have now increased their clinics' revenue because they've introduced something like transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is now a hardware device, and introduced a procedure within the office. And I think primary cares are starting to look more into that. That's the only thing. I agree, though. Yeah, so in a large hospital setting, like a radiologist, you're right. They don't want more stuff. But if you go to the private practice communities, they don't have the, they can't afford to buy these really expensive things that use the big players. The big players are still focused on these healthcare systems. I think this is the other trend, not a JP Morgan trend, but I feel like after the pandemic, so you see this mass resignation, right, that you're mentioning with physicians. Well, a lot of them saw how they were treated and the decisions hospitals made, for better or for worse, during the pandemic on how they were going to treat their patients. I know personally 2 major department heads, one in cardiology, one in orthopedic surgery, quit their jobs and they're like, I'm going to open my own practice. And so I think there's just going to be this new wave of private practice. But again, it's just so hard to compete these days. And that's, there's one new LinkedIn physician, Daniel Paul, young guy, and he's been gaining a lot of momentum. Daniel, you owe me for giving you a shout out on this. So so this guy is a couple years out of fellowship, orthopedic surgeon, hated how practices were being run, and is like, you know what? I'm not going to go work for a hospital. I'm not going to work for these group practices because none of this makes sense. And I hate insurance companies. So he not only has his own practice, it's a mobile orthopedic practice. So there's no office, mobile orthopedic surgeon, cash-based.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I believe it, and I believe it's a trend that can catch on because there's so much frustration with the traditional bounds of healthcare. I think for better or worse, it's going to change the patient experience as well. And I worry that if you want top-notch healthcare, you're going to need to be wealthy or work for a company that's deep-pocketed. And if you're a Medicaid patient, we don't have insurance, it's going to be much more difficult if that's basically how things are going to be, divided.
That's exactly what I thought. And then at least reading his posts, it seems that they're, there's 2 surgeons. So he's one, there's another orthopedic surgeon that does something completely different where they're doing more cash-based. And their thing is that they actually are doing less procedures and going through these cash-based alternatives. They have more preventative ways to help a patient, let's say, get the access and care that they need. So it prevents them from getting worse to get to a point of surgery. That was the one. Anytime I hear cash-based surgery, the first thing I think of is like, oh, that's great if you have a lot of money. But it seems like there's these alternatives. And even me, I mean, I'm not sitting on millions of dollars, but as somebody who holds private insurance, I've gotten frustrated myself as a consumer and said well, I'm not going to wait 3 months to see somebody. And I find somebody locally, and I'm like, okay, what's your cash-based price to see you and I'm like, okay, I'll just pay that. So I don't know. There's something, I don't know what trend can emerge out of this, but the way healthcare is right now, it's just got to change. I feel like with this mass resignation, there's going to be all these other changes, but maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just confirmation bias. I don't know.
So I'm one of these, I'm a patient at what I would call a concierge practice light. You've seen these pop up, One Medical, Forward. And I think the fee is actually fairly reasonable. I mean, it's in the low hundreds. And I think more people can join that than a traditional concierge medical practice, but they try to treat you a little bit better. And I think they probably try to treat their doctors a little better, although I don't know. I've never actually, other than my experience as a patient, I don't know what the work-in experience is. But I wonder if that's also going to be a trend that sort of accelerates, because I think it's true that if you can deal on volume, then you can keep your prices more reasonable. And the cost of entry could be, similar to an Amazon Prime membership. versus or a LinkedIn premium subscription plus the LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But then if you're talking about, thousands of dollars cash price, I had this experience with our mental health system this past year, is that if you want to, speaking of psychiatry, if you want to get an appointment and willing to pay out of pocket, they're still billing you at that, $700 an hour rate, which is pretty steep, I would say, for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so there's the one interesting thing is that the system's starting to feel pressure, and I feel like that's usually when you see innovation, is that people get frustrated. People are like, there has to be a different way, and then as people start getting creative about things, then something just eventually gives. Like, I feel like the mental health industry has been constantly trying to do telepsychiatry, and it was always just like, it was kind of like telepsychiatry pre-pandemic was very much like what wearables were in 2014, 2015. Like, it was like limited like to small group of like nerdy people who were really into it, but like that's it. But the moment that there was a need for it, now it's become standard. Like for me personally, and people, friends and family who either see a therapist or go to psychiatry, nobody wants to go to an office again. It's just like, no, let me just do it through the computer, because that's all I need. And I feel like the cost is so much better. It's a lot more convenient. I see a therapist who's across like 2 state lines, I think, And so I'm wondering. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, something I think there's, this is almost a cliche, but I think it's ripe for disruption, right? That's the word everybody's using, but I don't know if anyone's figured it out yet. I think a lot of people are probably trying. I think we're going to throw a lot of things at the wall and see what sticks. Maybe it'll be the big players. Maybe they'll say, this is too complicated, we're pulling out, and maybe it'll come from a field that we never expected. Maybe it's someone like the young physician that you mentioned. But I don't know if I see who the winners and losers are going to be yet.
Yeah,
and people
same
are
here.
Better position than I am to say that. But
I don't think anybody does. I mean, look, who would have predicted that after like 2 years in, like, what was it? I forgot the name of the company, but like Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan threw in the towel on the healthcare project.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh yeah, we're going to change healthcare. 2 years in, it's like, nope, unsubscribe. We're going to change our mind, everybody. Yeah, so at this point, like, it's hard to tell. Like, who knows? Who knows, And even when it comes to acquisition activity, there's certain companies where you feel like, oh, for sure this company's going to get acquired by like one of the, it happened this week. One company got acquired. There's a company called Itmar. They do sleep diagnostics. Everyone's like ResMed or Philips, one of the big sleep apnea players, is going to acquire them. Nope, it was Zoll. But when you dig deeper into it, like, oh, it makes sense because Zoll just acquired another company that does it has the first FDA cleared implantable device for sleep apnea. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I feel like JP Morgan this year is going to be lit. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Will you? So I don't know in the past, but like this year, do you actually go to JP Morgan? Do you try and attend some of the events or anything like that?
Well, they just announced it's going virtual. So
I didn't know that.
It's right down. Yeah, breaking news on LinkedIn today.
Breaking news.
Check it out. Breaking news. Yeah. So I guess it won't be breaking news by the time this airs.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So usually it's in my backyard here in San Francisco, and I try to, if not go to the sessions themselves, most of which are posted because these are publicly traded companies and they have to. But I do find the most value out of the networking and the parties at night and some of the offshoot conferences. I don't know. I guess we're going to hear a flurry of announcements in terms of what's going to be virtual and what's not, if people are still going to want to send employees. Yeah. So TBD, we're kind of at the inflection point right now. We'll see what happens. By the time this airs, everyone will know. But
yeah, no, that's interesting because, I mean, for those who have not been to JP Morgan, it is insane because, like, just picture like your biggest like annual conference being held at the Moscone Center or like one of those large conference centers, except the conference center is the entire freaking city. Like, I'll never forget, like, I was like, if I was at high school, like, a great side hustle would be like just buying out a bunch of Airbnbs and renting them out for like thousands of dollars because people are trying to like
people do that.
And they're meeting in like bathrooms and stuff. I heard like at certain restaurants, it's like after an hour you get charged like $15 per person per 15 minutes or something,
Hey,
so
why not? San Francisco really hasn't recovered, I think, to the extent it was pre-pandemic, and it's a bit of a ghost town here. And maybe in some ways it's unfortunate. Well, I guess it's good for public health probably that they're canceling it with Omicron, and we'll see whether that's still how that's shaking out by the time this airs. But yeah, I mean, I think for businesses down there, this was a huge boon to the local economy.
Got it. Yeah, and look, I want to be mindful of your time, but a few more things I want to address with you. So, looking back at sort of 2021, what were some of the things that perhaps like most surprised you, about some of the content that you came across on LinkedIn, things that you learned? Was there anything that kind of like caught you by surprise that you were like, oh, I didn't expect that?
No, everything went exactly according to expectations, I think. No, I mean, I think I don't know. I mean,
there's something went down that you cannot share, but that's okay. I will not press you. People are gonna get on me and be like, dude, why didn't you like dig a little bit deeper? But like, it's like I also want to make sure I stay on LinkedIn. I don't want to get blacklisted or anything.
They're proprietary. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, something I did want to bring up, like when you do some of your articles where you curate, so for example, like the one about how every business is becoming a healthcare company. I mean, how have the comments been in general? Like, have you, is there some kind of way that those things have to be managed? Like what have you gotten any ideas at least from the comments? Because one thing that, again, trend that we've seen from earlier is that people are spending more time leaving deeper and more engaging comments. Like if somebody doesn't have a huge following, they go on somebody else's page who has a huge following, leave a deeper comment, everybody sees it, right? And so a lot of stuff gets discovered there. Has you, or at least LinkedIn, started curating like those comments, start boosting them? Have those become their own thing?
Yeah, so that a lot of times we'll write the article and then we'll do sort of a day 2 follow-up, and it's reader reactions to the article, maybe an angle we didn't expect, but that showed up. And then in our news module where we curate all these comments, that's where we curate them, or in our own newsletters. That's where we'll say, it's a way to take a pulse of what's going on. And I think the reason I struggled with the previous question is I think that level of discontent that people are feeling right now, I think we could have predicted it from 2020. I mean, I don't think anything that's happening is really all that surprising. I mean, I knew we went through this lull over the summer where everyone kind of expected things. There was so much optimism, right? And, my husband was someone who cautioned, the numbers of people who were vaccinated didn't match up with and even the numbers of people who were infected didn't match up. We still had this huge number of hosts, right? And so it was almost inevitable that this would happen. And I think, there was a bit of cautious optimism in healthcare, but I think there was also this just like defeatism, and if that's a word, but this level of defeat that people were feeling. And, they were happy for the reprieve. I think if you're, in a place like the Bay Area, you're probably feeling pretty good. If you're a place like Minnesota or Michigan these days, you're probably just like, just overwhelmed. And I think that's going to continue to be on theme, unfortunately, going into the new year.
Definitely. Well, look, we appreciate your time. So we're going to wrap up. One last question, then we're going to get into. Very happy note to end on.
That makes it
very happy. No, we're going to end on a happier note.
Okay, good.
But before we get into the sort of the ending segment of this, so my last question to you, just to put you on the spot, is that, and you have to give a name. You can't say like, oh, I love all of them. It's like, no, you don't love everyone. So my question to you is that, look, you've been doing this for a few years now, so you've seen it all, and you really kept track on things. Who are some of your favorite people within the healthcare community that you either get inspired by, you enjoy their articles or content? Like, who are some people you want to kind of give some shout outs to?
So I will name names, but I will also put in a plug for our top voices list that's coming out the week during the JP Morgan week. And so we've curated 15 names, and I don't want to give too much away, but we also have some great influencers on the platform, like Dr. Tedros, who is the Director General of the World Health Organization. That is what they call him. I've met with his team, and he's just been phenomenal in terms of posting. Another great influencer is Dean Miter of Stanford University School of Medicine. He was just on a live show with me. I enjoy your content, Omar, of course. I'm sure everybody here always already following you. Dr. Rhonda Meadows at Providence, she does population health for them. Bonnie Clipper, if there are any nurses on, she was the previous head of innovation at the ANA, has been great about, talking about innovation. Some other innovation folks, Lyle Berkowitz is a physician who writes about medtech. There's so many great ones. So yeah, stay tuned for the Top Voices list. It's coming out in mid-January, and there'll be lots of great names. Follow all of them.
That's fantastic. How does the Top Voices list get curated, essentially? Like, is there like an application for that? I don't think you can apply for those kind of things. It just
it's based on data, and the data is not it's and it has to do with engagement. So we're looking at engagement metrics. So not just how often do you post and how many followers do you have, but do you get a lot of comments? Do you comment in return? So all those best practices I was mentioning earlier, that's the best way to one day be a top voice if you want to.
Totally. All right, now that we got that out of the way, we're going to end the segment with my favorite part, which is the rapid questions. Okay. So we're going to do like 2 or 3 rapid questions.
Well, you didn't warn me about
questions.
This. Okay.
I know. No, that's the thing. I don't warn anybody about this. The only people who know about this are people who have like listened to my shows in the past and they know it's coming, or they've come on the show already.
I'm outing myself now.
Yeah, exactly.
First time listener.
I'm sorry. This is like your first experience with the podcast. You're like, I'm never doing that again, ever. I'm gonna get messages, in the future. It's like, hey, dude, like we wanted to have Beth on our podcast. She says she doesn't do podcasts because thanks. So first question to you. Okay, during the pandemic, we all bought like worthless crap, but some of it was like really meaningful stuff. Some of us bought some cool books, gadgets, etc. What was the coolest thing that you bought under $200? Could be a book, it could be a gadget, it could be anything. But what did you Amazon Prime for under $200?
Well, I didn't Amazon Prime her, but I have to go with my quarantine cat, who we adopted.
You got a
in March
quarantine
2020.
cat?
We do. Her name is Katie. She's a Manx, which is a special breed without a tail, and we love her. I resisted the idea of a cat for a very long time. My daughter finally wore me down, and she is just the most beloved family member. And I think she was about $200 when we. I don't know if bought is the right word. I didn't buy her. We adopted her, but
you adopted her.
Yeah.
Well, I had a quarantine cat as well. It was this, when we were up in the Bay, there's this, so orange cats supposedly genetically are all male and they're all like predisposed to be extremely friendly. I don't know why. This one cat was in my neighborhood. He was kind of abandoned by like a family. Like they're there, but they just never let him in the house because he fights with the other cats. So he's always outside. We started bringing him in, and he's like been in a number of my videos and everything. We did not bring him down to SoCal with us because he like would roam that entire neighborhood, and I felt like it would be wrong to bring him with us. But yeah, I really miss that guy a lot. I'm allergic to cats actually, but that cat was amazing. His best name, by the way, Mr. Pancake.
Oh, good.
Great name. Yeah, It's a great name. Okay, so next question for you. Continuing education is a very important aspect of healthcare, especially if you talk to doctors and nurses. This is just like, a big part of it. For you in the last few years, like, is there a book, and I've also amended this for people who don't read a whole lot, but like a book or a podcast that you feel that you often recommend to others?
Does it have to be healthcare related?
No, it does not. Yeah, I need to preface that. You're the third person to ask me this. It does not. None of these have to be healthcare related.
And maybe this is a recency bias, but I read a book called On the Clock recently, which is about how the changing worlds of work. It's about a journalist who goes undercover at an Amazon warehouse, an AT&T call center, and a McDonald's. And it's really eye-opening in terms of how, especially for a medtech audience, perhaps, how technology is making work a lot more difficult for these essential workers. And it's fascinating. Yeah.
On the Clock.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Got it. Perfect. All right, 2 more questions, okay? So throughout your career, no doubt you've had a lot of mentors. That could be your spouse, your parents, friends, people you work with and everything. What was the most painful thing someone ever told you that actually made you better?
Oh, this is an easy one. When I told my old school boss at Modern Healthcare that I was leaving traditional journalism, he started yelling at me, said I would never make it to the New York Times, and I was ruining my career.
That's such like a media thing that like my old school boss. I'm just picturing the guy from like the Spider-Man movie with like cigars. Like he's like, you'll never make it, and you'll never make it to the New York Times. It doesn't help that you're in New York either. Oh God, you see. So how did that change you?
I did take a moment to kind of, I did have a little bit of trepidation joining LinkedIn because of that, am I making a huge mistake? And I was leaving a field that I cared about very deeply. But now I feel, first of all, I've never looked back. I don't even, know if the New York Times is even my goal. And I don't, I didn't know if it was back then either.
As a friend, don't make New York, for anyone listening, don't make working at the New York Times your goal. It's not what it used to be.
But, I think what I like about here is I think we're setting the tone not just for content strategy, but content distribution. And it's been really fascinating, the skills that I've learned here. And I think if I had listened to his advice, I probably wouldn't. Well, there was no way I was going to listen to his advice. but joining LinkedIn has definitely made me a better media professional.
Fantastic. All right, last question. Okay, so I want you to pretend that next year I take a billboard out. And because a lot of people are at home, let's say a digital billboard too. So, but a billboard nonetheless. Every person, every healthcare professional, let's say that's active on LinkedIn, is going to see this message every day they go into work. What message do you put on that billboard?
About LinkedIn?
About anything.
So my personal mantra is always choose your happiness over your fear. I think in these COVID times when everyone has a lot of anxiety, I have to remind myself about that, sometimes fairly frequently, but yeah, always, if fear is holding you back, always choose your happiness over your fear.
What a great quote. What a great way to end it. And very much resonating with me. Wow. And this is your first podcast. See, that's the tough, that last question is the one that trips everybody up and they're like, oh, I need to think about that. I interviewed a spine surgeon a few weeks ago and he's like said his website. I'm like, no, dude, that's not what no, not your website. Come on. What a great, fantastic quote. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been an honor. I hope to have you back. I hope I didn't scare you off, but I definitely hope to have you back. Audience, I'm leaving in the show notes everything that we just talked about, including Beth's LinkedIn handle, as well as her. You said that Path to Recovery is a newsletter and a group, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. I'll leave that all in the show notes. And for everybody listening, because I'll be doing it, I want to see that you guys do it as well. JP Morgan predictions, you need them 1 week before JP Morgan conference, right?
No, you need them the week of JP Morgan's conference.
Oh, the week of. Okay,
yeah.
What's that? And that week is January
10th.
January 10th.
And my newsletter comes out on Thursdays, so make sure you post them between the 10th and the 12th. If you post them the week before, I can still use them. So I'm not saying don't do that, but you have until the 12th.
Okay, so post between the 10th and the 12th. All right, predictions.
Hashtag healthcare in 2022.
Hashtag healthcare in 2022. We're going to make that trend. Awesome. Okay. Beth, hey, it was such a pleasure. Stay on for just a few minutes just to chat. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm your host and head of state, Omar Khateeb. This is the State of MedTech, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The State of MedTech. I'm your host, Omar Khateeb. Do us a favor, if you like this episode, share with somebody, and go ahead on Apple and Spotify, wherever you are, leave a 5-star review, type a few nice notes about us. This is how we get other people to find the show. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.